again, welcome back to the studio. It's time for another edition of All My Modular. We've got sort of a tricky category today, and it's kind of hard to define some of these modules, so I'm just throwing them together. Just roll with it, you know. This is going to be multifunction modules and controllers, and let's just get to it. We'll start off with the mutable instrument stages. This is a segment generator. That's the description that Mutable gives this. This is no longer available, but I understand there is a clone now from After Later Audio, I believe. So you can still pick this up used as well if you shop around, but you might be paying a bit more for it. If you think of this as 6 separate steps in a shape you want to create, that's one way to do it. You can do complex envelopes with it. Each step can repeat, so you can use those as LFOs as well. You can use 2 of these as an attack release envelope, and a couple of them as LFOs, however you want to divide that up. You can use this as a sequencer. I do tend to mostly use this as a bunch of single segment envelopes, so just release envelopes, and sometimes as LFOs. I don't think it's critical to my system, but I do use it quite a bit. I'm not sure if I would miss it terribly if it were gone, but I'd say it's a solid module, and you should check out some tutorials on it if you're interested, to see how many different things it can do. It's quite impressive. Next, I've got from Mann, Maschine, the DROID Universal CV processor. I've got 2 of these. In order to use this system, you have to get the master module. And I've also got one extension module. This whole system is based on the idea of creating your own CV source. It takes some programming on your end, and there is a computer application that you can do some of the programming on. And it's got a micro SD card. You can load up your programs and share them with others who have the system as well. And it helps if you have a programming background. I probably wouldn't recommend it if you don't at least have a little bit of that in you already. But, you know, in theory, this can do a whole lot. I mean, I've used it to replicate features of modules that I might otherwise buy, just to see if the idea works on my system. I've used it to create new takes on sequencers and shift registers that sort of occurred to me, and I just wanted to try them out. And really, the possibilities are almost endless, especially if you invest in more of the expander modules. There are expander modules with more buttons or more knobs. They have one expander with motorized faders, if that's something you're looking for. So very powerful, but requires a lot of work on your end to make it fit in to your system. Next is the Expert Sleepers Disting. This is the Mark IV. It's a many-in-one multifunction module. There is a larger version of this module which sort of combines 2 of these together, as well as some other functions that require more inputs and outputs. I would say if you were rating modules on useful functions per dollar, this would be right on the top of the list. There's so many algorithms in this. There are CV algorithms, there are audio algorithms, there are effects, there are oscillators. I used to use it for shift register duties before I got an Ornament and Crime. And I gotta say, you know, so many times I have said, oh, if only I had one more of such and such. It's right there in the Disting, and it's it's unbelievable how much you can do. The drawback is that it's hard to read the screen. You've got just one button that you push and you turn sometimes simultaneously, trying to get some of the parameters to show up. So it's a little bit annoying from a user interface perspective. But I still recommend this to anybody who's got especially smaller systems or starter systems who want to try out some functions before they start spending on larger modules to see what might work in their setup. Next, I've got the MIDI 1U and the CVX, which is the expander to the MIDI 1U. These are from Intellijel, and they bring MIDI into your system, and especially if you've got an Intellijel palette, because they interface very well with those. There's a MIDI input on my case itself, which hooks right into this module. If you don't have that, Intellijel sells a separate module, which will do that extra step for you to bring the MIDI signal in. What I like about this, and especially the two of them combined, is that I can have an external controller bringing 8 separate CV sources into my system. The main module brings in sort of one voice worth of MIDI. So you've got a pitch control, a mod wheel control, you've got gate signals, etc. And with the expander, you can assign those 8 extra outputs however you like, using an application on your computer. The application itself is tricky. I had some trouble with it setting it up initially. I don't know if things have changed since I purchased this. It's been a while. But I did eventually get it exactly how I like it. I use this with my iPad as a controller using Touch OSC. I'll insert a picture here of what that looks like. And so I've got externally a bunch of faders, a little mini keyboard and such, and it's going into this module and coming out as CV, where I can control whatever I want in my system. Super, super useful. And if you're looking for a way to bring MIDI into your system, and especially if you've already got an Intellijel palette, pick up the two of these together, I would say, and you're going to be able to get a lot of control in. Next, we've got the Befaco Muxlicer, and I'll also be talking about the expander, which is called the Mex. This is a VC addressable sequential switch and sequencer. It's a very interesting and creative module. It's firstly a 1-to-8 and 8-to-1 switch, so it's bidirectional. It's CV addressable as a switch. It's also sort of an 8-step sequencer, which includes features such as ratcheting. There are self-patch options. The values of the steps are CV addressable as well. It's something I got early on, and I kind of liked it just because it opens up a lot of strange new doors. It does take some thinking to understand it all. There are some good overview videos out there if you do a search. I'm using it a little less these days. I think I feel like I've sort of played out its possibilities. I do still use it as a trigger sequencer, but it has a little bit of an issue with that, in my opinion, with the reset input for the sequence, in that it's kind of particular on when the reset happens. It doesn't reset immediately when it gets a trigger in the reset input. Instead, it waits until the next clock. Now, I know some time-based modules do this. I prefer it to switch immediately and then to advance again on the next clock. That's That's the way I like to do things. I do compensate for this when I've got other modules that are being clocked by a common source, such as Pam's new workout, that I find I have to delay the gate a bit, or delay the trigger a bit to match up with everything else in my system. So I find that a little fiddly, a little frustrating sometimes. I don't think there's anything else out there like it. It has been compared to the Draw Analog Step 8, but which I don't own and haven't used. But I think there are enough differences there that I don't think it really should be a direct comparison. I do feel like if I were somehow to lose this module, I would probably pick up a Step 8 instead to replace it, because it does some of the things that seem interesting to me. The Mex expander allows some additional trigger settings per step, so you can sort of build up more rhythmic variation. You can expand, you can get several of these expanders. I find I don't use the one I have a whole lot as it is, so I won't be expanding it further. Next is the Qubit Chance. This is a random voltage source. It's got a lot of different types of random. It has white noise, it's got digital noise, and it has CVE outputs of stepped and smooth random voltages, some other interesting types of random. And there's a function to sweep, sort of crossfade between some of these random sources. It's an interesting idea, but I don't really tend to use that. And I believe that that function and the extra knob in the middle is why this module is so wide. I don't like the footprint on this. That's my one complaint, but it does what it's supposed to do, and I use it frequently. I've got a lot of random sources, chaos sources, and this fits right in with the stuff I'm doing. Next is the WMD 410 or A10. This is a 4-channel attenuator and offset, so faders basically. I use them mostly as faders, but sometimes as attenuators. It's very handy to have in such a small space, just 4 HP, 4 attenuators. I move them to the front of my case so I have quick access to features of modules that are further away in my case, just to run some patch cables up. I like to keep most of my performance right up front of the case so I don't have to reach a lot, and this is a way to take care of some of that. The only very small quibble I have of it is that the normalization to use these as faders runs from 0 to 5 volts. I prefer it to be a little bit more than that because it's not a full range of what some modules are accepting for CB control. Michigan Synthworks, Micro, Ornament, and Crime. Now this is an open source module. There are a lot of other companies besides Michigan Synthworks making these. There are larger versions, there are 1U versions. They're all running basically the same software with some variations. There are alternate firmwares you can get to give you different applications within it. There's some very interesting applications included with the original firmware. I'm sticking with the original firmware because I mainly just use one application. It's called Quantum, which is a 4-channel shift register with quantization built in. And shift registers for me, I mean, that's my jam. That's what I use a lot to generate some melodies. And having 4 channels, it's great. There are some other great applications. I've used a couple of them, but I always come back to Quantum. That's really central to the patches I'm doing these days. The one thing you have to get used to is the very small screen on this. I guess if it's not a micro version, maybe you have a larger screen. I haven't really looked at all the options. This is fine for me. I don't mind the screen just because I tend to take a little time to set up what I need, and then I can forget about it and patch and just keep going. This is a super useful module. Everyone seems to have one of these. If you don't know what's included or you want to see more about this, there are a lot of great videos out there, and I don't want to get into the weeds talking about what each different application does, but it's definitely worth exploring. Go take a look at some of those. Next is the WMD Sl3kt. This is a 3-channel bidirectional switch. It's very simple. It doesn't have any extended functions. It's just CV control of the switch, or a little flipped switch to do it manually. There's some normalization between the channels, which is kind of interesting, I guess, but not super useful. And I don't think this is still available, but switches are great, especially if you're doing any kind of generative stuff. I find it useful. So simple, functional, nothing to write home about, but I like it. Lastly, I would like to talk about the Shakmat barred Quartet. Now, I've only had this for a couple of weeks, and it's already invaluable to me. I bought it to replace my ADAC quantizer. It's the ADAC intuitive quantizer, which I don't find particularly intuitive. That's sort of my main beef with it. Saving presets on it, setting up the different controls through CV. It's confusing. I sometimes have to open the manual and scratch my head about how am I even saving this preset. It's sort of the opposite of intuitive. And I'm sure if I were using all those extra functions constantly, I would become acclimated and it might be fine. But I wanted to pick up barred Quartet because after watching some videos on it, I saw that it seemed very easy to switch between different harmonies, which I like to do, just get some harmonic motion in my pieces. You can have different scales and harmonies between each of the 4 voices, which the ADAC could not do. And it's easy to switch between 8 different sets of those 8 scales. So a lot of variety can be had in a piece, and the ADAC didn't quite do that for me. It got an expander, which I don't have yet. I guess I'll wait for the inevitable Labor Day sale at Perfect Circuit, pick one of these up, and try to find gotta find out how I can squeeze this into my system. You may not know this, but I've got a perfect fit at the moment. Every single HP is full. So yeah, time to sell off some modules. Anyway, I hope this was fun for you. I hope you learned some stuff, and please send me any questions, comments about these. If you want to know about a particular feature, I'd be happy to address it in the comments. And I hope you guys will consider subscribing and liking. I really appreciate that. I appreciate any feedback, and I'll see you in the next video.